But you think you know how the justice system works? You think the badge always wins? Think again. In a packed Chicago courtroom, Officer Derek Nolan made the biggest mistake of his life. He thought his uniform gave him the right to put his hands on a sitting Congresswoman, Vanessa Brooks. He slapped her across the face in front of a stunned judge. But he didn't know who she really was. Instantly, the aggressor was on the floor, unconscious. But that knockout was just the beginning. What happened next exposed a long-standing conspiracy, destroyed a precinct, and served up a plate of karma so cold it froze hell over. This is the story of the slap heard round the world. The air in the courtroom at the Cook County Courthouse wasn't just stale. It was pressurized. It smelled of floor wax, old wood, and the distinct acrid scent of anxiety. The heating system was blasting at full capacity, turning the gallery into a suffocating box. Sitting in the front row of the gallery was Congresswoman Vanessa Brooks. She was a striking figure. Though that day she had traded her usual tailored congressional blazers for a simpler dark navy trench coat, she wasn't there. In her official capacity as Congresswoman representing the district, she was there as an aunt. Beside her sat her nephew, Connor, a young engineering student who was currently shaking like a leaf. Connor had been pulled over for a broken taillight that miraculously worked perfectly fine once the car was impounded. The charge was resisting arrest, a catch-all that Vanessa knew all too well. "Chin up, Connor," Vanessa whispered, her voice a low rumble of controlled steel. She placed a hand on his knee. "We have the dashcam footage. We have the truth. Do not let them see you sweat." Standing near the bailiff station was the arresting officer, Derek Nolan. Nolan was a man who took up space aggressively. He was 6'3", with the thick neck of a former linebacker and a haircut shaved high and tight. He stood with his thumbs hooked into his duty belt, chewing gum with an open mouth, scanning the room with a look of bored disdain. He was a veteran of the force, a man with numerous internal affairs complaints and zero disciplinary actions. In the precinct, they called him the Teflon Sergeant. He caught Vanessa staring at him. He didn't look away. Instead, he smirked, a slow, insolent curling of the lip, and winked. It was a small gesture, but it carried a weight that made Vanessa's stomach turn. It was the wink of a man who believed he owned the building, the judge, and the laws written in the books. "All rise," the bailiff barked. "The Honorable Judge Harold Benson presiding." Judge Benson swept in. He was an older man, tired-looking, with skin like crinkled parchment, and spectacles that slid perpetually down his nose. He was known as a let's-get-to-lunch judge. He liked quick pleas and quiet courtrooms. People versus Connor Brooks. Resisting arrest, obstruction. Vanessa's lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Rachel Hayes, stood up. "Ready for the defense, Your Honor. We are moving for immediate dismissal based on newly acquired evidence." Dismissal. The prosecutor, a young, overworked man named Ethan Price, looked up from his file startled. "Your Honor, Officer Nolan is present to testify that the defendant was belligerent." "And belligerent?" Rachel cut in, her voice slicing through the humid air. "Officer Nolan wrote in his report that my client struck him. We have the time-stamped dashcam footage from the car behind my client, provided by a witness, which shows Officer Nolan dragging my client out of the window before a word was spoken." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The boredom vanished. Officer Nolan's jaw stopped moving. The gum chewing ceased. He unhooked his thumbs from his belt and straightened up, his face darkening from a bored pink to an angry crimson. "Your Honor." Nolan spoke up, ignoring protocol. His voice was a bass boom that rattled the dividers. "That video is taken out of context. The suspect reached for his waistband." "Officer, you will speak when addressed," Judge Benson said, though his tone was mild, lacking the reprimand it deserved. "I'm just saying," Nolan continued, stepping forward, encroaching on the well of the court. "These people, they edit these videos. They manipulate the narrative to make us look bad. I've been on this beat for years. I know a threat when I see one. These people." Vanessa spoke. She hadn't meant to. It slipped out. She stood up in the gallery, her trench coat falling open to reveal the congressional pin on her lapel, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Sit down, ma'am," the bailiff warned. "No." Nolan turned, his body pivoting toward the gallery. He saw Vanessa. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but it wasn't fear. It was annoyance. He didn't see an elected official. He saw an obstacle. "Yeah, I said what I said. You got a problem with that, lady?" "Officer Nolan," Judge Benson said louder this time. "Step back." "I am the aunt of the defendant," Vanessa said, her voice projecting with the practiced clarity of a seasoned orator. "And I am the Congresswoman for this district. And I'm curious, officer, what you imply by these people." Nolan laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. He walked past the prosecutor's table, moving toward the wooden railing that separated the court well from the public gallery. He was violating every protocol in the book, but the room was frozen in that peculiar paralysis that happens when authority figures go rogue. "Congresswoman," Nolan scoffed, leaning over the rail, his face inches from hers. "You think a title impresses me? I run these streets. You just cut ribbons. Sit down and shut up, or I'll have you removed for disturbing the peace. You're threatening an elected official in a court of law." Vanessa held her ground. She didn't blink. She smelled the coffee and mint on his breath. "You're proving my lawyer's point, officer. You lack discipline." That was the trigger. Nolan's face contorted. The vein in his forehead bulged. He had spent years bullying teenagers and frightening witnesses. He wasn't used to a woman, especially a black woman, looking him in the eye and analyzing his psyche. "You listen to me, you," Nolan growled, reaching over the barrier. "Officer." The judge slammed his gavel, but it was too late. The powder keg had found its spark. The courtroom went silent, a vacuum of sound as Officer Derek Nolan did the unthinkable. Fueled by a cocktail of ego, adrenaline, and unchecked impunity, he swung his right hand. It wasn't a punch. It was a backhand slap intended to humiliate rather than injure. It was a gesture of ownership. Thwack! The sound was sickeningly loud. It echoed off the high ceilings and the wooden benches. Nolan's heavy hand connected with Vanessa Brooks' left cheek. The force of it knocked her head to the side. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Connor screamed, "Auntie!" and surged up, but was grabbed by the bailiff. For one moment, time seemed to suspend. Nolan stood there, chest heaving, a look of shocked triumph on his face. He expected her to cower. He expected her to cry. He expected the bailiffs to swarm her for provoking an officer. He was wrong on all counts. Vanessa Brooks did not cry. She did not cower. Slowly, she turned her face back to center. Her cheek was already swelling, a bright red mark forming against her skin. But her eyes were terrifying. They were devoid of panic. They were calculating. What Nolan didn't know, what wasn't on her Wikipedia page or her campaign flyers, was Vanessa's life before politics. Before she was a congresswoman, before she was a community organizer, Vanessa Brooks had spent several years as a tactical defense instructor for private security firms in overseas conflict zones. She knew Krav Maga. She knew how to de-escalate. But more importantly, she knew how to finish a fight that someone else started. Big mistake, she whispered. Nolan sneered, raising his hand again. You want another one? He lunged, reaching over the railing to grab her collar. Vanessa moved. It was a blur of efficiency as Nolan reached out, overextended and off balance. Vanessa stepped in, not away. She parried his arm with her left forearm, deflecting his grasp upward. In the same fluid motion, she drove her right palm into his sternum, knocking the wind out of him. Nolan stumbled back, gasping, his eyes bulging. He hadn't expected the strength. He roared, a guttural sound of rage, and swung a clumsy, heavy haymaker punch. Vanessa ducked under the swing with the grace of a dancer. She pivoted on her heel, generating torque from her hips. She didn't use a closed fist that breaks fingers. She used the heel of her palm, driving it upward in a precise, devastating arc that connected squarely with the point of Nolan's chin. The mechanics of a knockout are simple. Rapid acceleration of the head causes the brain to rattle against the skull, triggering a neural shutdown. Nolan's head snapped back. His feet left the floor for a fraction of a second. His eyes rolled back into his head. His knees turned to water. He didn't stumble. He didn't stagger. He fell like a chopped tree, stiff, then limp. He hit the floor of the courtroom with a heavy, final thud right in front of the prosecutor's table. Complete silence. Vanessa stood over him, smoothing the lapels of her trench coat. She was breathing rhythmically, in through the nose, out through the mouth. She looked up at the stunned Judge Benson, whose gavel was suspended in midair. Your Honor, Vanessa said, her voice calm but carrying a tremor of adrenaline. I assert self-defense under Illinois law. Please note for the record that the officer initiated physical contact. The silence broke. Chaos erupted. Officer down! Officer down! The bailiff shouted into his radio. Though he made no move to arrest Vanessa, he had seen the slap. He knew. Connor was staring at his aunt with his mouth open. Rachel Hayes, the lawyer, was furiously typing on her phone. On the floor, Derek Nolan twitched once, then lay still, snoring softly, the sound of a deep concussion. Secure the room! Voices shouted from the hallway. More deputies burst in. Vanessa raised her hands slowly, palms open. I am unarmed. I am cooperating. The deputies hesitated. They looked at the unconscious Nolan, then at the composed woman in the trench coat. They recognized her. The dynamic in the room was confusing. Usually the person standing is the villain, and the cop on the floor is the victim. But the energy here was different. The gallery had seen it. The clerk had seen it. Miss Brooks, Judge Benson said, his voice shaking, please remain where you are. I'm not going anywhere, Judge. She replied, her gaze fixed on the doors. But I suspect the world is about to come in. She was right. In the back row, a teenager with a smartphone had been live streaming the entire hearing on TikTok. The stream had started with few viewers. It now had thousands. The title of the stream, Cop Slaps Congresswoman Gets Rocked. The upload button had already been pressed. The clip was flying across Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit before Nolan even woke up. When Derek Nolan regained consciousness, he was in the back of an ambulance. His jaw felt like it had been wired shut, and his vision was swimming. What happened? He mumbled, trying to sit up. Easy, partner, said Officer Chris Harlan, his partner, who was sitting by the stretcher. Harlan looked pale. You got knocked out, man, by the Congresswoman. Nolan blinked, the memory rushing back. The humiliation hit him harder than the blow. A woman, a politician, in front of everyone. Rage, hot and blinding, flooded his system. Arrest her! Nolan spat, blood dribbling from his lip. Assault on an officer battery. I want her buried under the jail. Tell the chief to throw the book at her. Partner. Harlan hesitated. He looked at his phone. It's complicated. Complicated? She hit a cop? Yeah, but you hit her first, and it's on video. It's everywhere. CNN is already outside the courthouse. Nolan lay back. A cold knot formed in his stomach. But the Teflon sergeant didn't panic easily. He knew the system. He knew how the game was played. The video would be blurry. The union would spin it. She provoked him. She was a threat. Call the rep, Nolan growled, referring to the union representative. Wait, no, strictly avoid that name. Tell Victor to activate the protocol. We kill her reputation. She's unstable. She hates cops. Dig up dirt. While Nolan plotted his revenge from the ambulance, Vanessa Brooks was sitting in a holding cell in the basement of the courthouse. She hadn't been formally charged yet. The police were paralyzed by the politics of the situation. Rachel Hayes paced outside the bars. They're stalling, Vanessa. They don't know what to do. If they charge you, they ignite a riot. If they let you go, the police union revolts. Let them revolt, Vanessa said, icing her cheek with a cold soda can a sympathetic clerk had given her. Did you get the file? Nolan, I need his full jacket, not the public one, the real one. Rachel stopped pacing. She lowered her voice. Vanessa, you know I can't access sealed IA records. Call Riley. She owes me. Riley implies the hacker. Rachel's eyes widened. I mean the information specialist, Vanessa corrected. Nolan didn't just snap today. That level of entitlement, that comfort with violence, that's learned behavior. He's done this before. And I'm going to find out who he did it to. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, the narrative war had begun. The police union president, Victor Kane, stood before a phalanx of microphones. He was a red-faced man with a thick Chicago accent. What we saw today was a vicious, unprovoked attack on a decorated officer, he bellowed. Congresswoman Brooks is a danger to society. The video being circulated is edited and misleading. Officer Nolan was preempting a physical threat. We demand Congresswoman Brooks's immediate resignation and arrest. The media outlets, hungry for conflict, ran the headline, Congresswoman versus cop. Who attacked who? But the internet wasn't buying the spin. The unedited footage was too clear. The sound of the slap was too crisp. Within hours, #StandWithVanessa was trending globally. But hashtags don't save you from the legal system. The district attorney, a politically ambitious man named Robert Klein, made his move. He couldn't ignore the police union. The cell door opened. 2 officers entered, looking grim. Vanessa Brooks, one said, you are being charged with aggravated battery of a peace officer. Hands behind your back. Vanessa stood up. She didn't resist. As the cuffs clicked tight, she looked at Rachel. Start the clock. They just declared war. As she was led out to the transport van for the perp walk the media was waiting for, Vanessa saw the crowd. Thousands of people had gathered. They weren't just chanting her name. They were chanting the names of people Nolan had arrested over the years. And in the back of the crowd, watching from the shadows of a parking garage, was a man in a gray suit. He held a phone to his ear. She survived the arrest, the man said. Nolan failed to intimidate her. She's going to dig. If she looks into the old case, we're all exposed. On the other end of the line, a distorted voice replied, then make sure she doesn't make it to trial. Nolan is a liability. Cut him loose, but destroy the Congresswoman. The blue wall was closing ranks, but not to protect Nolan. They were closing ranks to hide something much darker. Nolan was just the pawn. Vanessa was about to realize that she hadn't just slapped a cop. She had punched a hole in a long-standing conspiracy involving the city's missing evidence locker. The knockout was the easy part. Survival would be the challenge. Vanessa Brooks did not spend the night in jail. The political pressure was too immense. A judge from a neighboring district, one not beholden to the local police union, granted her bail on personal recognizance. When she walked out of the precinct, the scene was biblical. The streetlights reflected off a sea of umbrellas and placards. The chant was rhythmic, a heartbeat of the city. Hands off Vanessa. Hands off Vanessa. She didn't stop for speeches. She didn't smile for the cameras. She ducked into a waiting black SUV, driven by Rachel Hayes. To the office? Rachel asked, checking the rearview mirror for tails. No, Vanessa said, staring out the window at the rain-slicked streets. Take me to the Hive. The Hive was an unassuming internet cafe in a gentrified part of the Wicker Park neighborhood. In the back room, surrounded by cooling fans and server racks, lived Riley Quinn. Riley was a former NSA analyst who had been fired for blowing the whistle on domestic surveillance. She now worked as a private information consultant for high-profile defense attorneys. Vanessa entered the back room, the humidity of the cooling systems hitting her instantly. Riley spun around in her ergonomic chair. She was a tiny woman with neon green braids and thick glasses surrounded by 3 monitors. You're trending higher than the Super Bowl, Riley said without a greeting. And Nolan, he's getting destroyed in the comments, but the bots are out in force trying to paint you as a cop hater. I don't care about the bots, Riley. I care about the file, Vanessa said, pulling up a chair. Tell me about Nolan. Riley cracked her knuckles. Okay, so Officer Derek Nolan. Standard bully profile, high school linebacker, C-average student, rejected by the Marines, joined the academy years ago. But here's where it gets weird. Riley tapped a key and a timeline appeared on the center screen. During a past raid in the street crimes unit, you remember them? The Jump Out Boys. They were notorious. Disbanded after the corruption scandal. Exactly, Riley said. Nolan was in the unit during the scandal, but his name was scrubbed from the final report. He was the only member of that unit who didn't get fired or indicted. He was transferred quietly and promoted to sergeant shortly after. How does a rookie survive a purge that took down captains? Vanessa asked. That's the million-dollar question. So I dug into the arrest logs from that time. A raid on a stash house owned by the Vargas Syndicate. The police report says they seized $50,000 in cash and 10 kilos of product. Riley grinned. And I found the original deposition of the stash house guard, a guy named Little Tommy Ruiz, before he mysteriously hanged himself in his cell shortly after. He told his public defender that there was $250,000 in that safe. Not 50. 200 grand missing. Nolan was on the raid, Vanessa whispered. Nolan logged the evidence. Riley corrected. But here's the kicker. The supervising officer who signed off on Nolan's log, the man who protected him from the purge, Riley pulled up a photo. It was a picture of a younger, leaner man in a uniform. Vanessa gasped. The man in the photo was Victor Kane, the current police union president, the man who was currently on TV calling Vanessa a criminal. Kane wasn't just his boss, Riley said. He was his partner in the theft. Nolan stole the money. Kane cooked the books and they split the cash. That's the leverage. Nolan knows where their bodies are buried. Kane has to protect him, or Nolan talks. Vanessa stood up, pacing the small room. The pieces were fitting together. Nolan wasn't just an aggressive cop. He was a protected asset in a criminal enterprise hiding behind badges. His arrogance in the courtroom came from the certainty that he was untouchable because he held the union president's leash. But we can't prove the money theft, Rachel pointed out from the doorway. That was years ago. Ruiz is dead. We don't need to prove the theft. Vanessa said, her eyes narrowing. We just need to prove that Nolan is still doing it. What do you mean? Men like that don't stop, Vanessa said. If he stole, then he's stealing now. He's comfortable. He's sloppy. Pull up his recent arrests, Vanessa said. Look for drug busts where the suspect claimed money was missing. Riley's fingers flew across the keyboard. Okay, filtering. Holy, there are a dozen complaints recently. Small amounts. 500 here, 1,000 there. Suspects charged with resisting arrest, just like Connor. And in every single case, the body cam malfunctioned during the search. He's skimming, Vanessa said. He's robbing drug dealers and citizens during stops because he knows they won't report it. Or if they do, no one will believe them. We have a pattern, Rachel said. But we need hard evidence. We need to catch him in the act. Vanessa looked at the screen at Nolan's smug face. He's angry right now. He's humiliated. He's gonna lash out. He's gonna try to hurt me or my family to get his dignity back. And when he does, we're gonna be recording. You want to bait him? Rachel asked, horrified. No, Vanessa said. I want to feed him the rope he's going to hang himself with. The media cycle had shifted from shock to full-blown war. The Chicago Tribune ran a front-page story, the slap, self-defense or assault. But on the streets, the verdict was already in. Murals of Vanessa landing the palm strike were already being painted in Pilsen and Englewood. She had become an instant icon of resistance. Derek Nolan sat in his living room staring at the TV. His jaw was wired shut, forcing him to drink a protein shake through a straw. His wife, Brooke, had taken the kids to her mother's house in Wisconsin until things blew over. The house was empty, silent and suffocating. His phone buzzed. It was Kane. You're looking bad, Derek. The DA is wobbling. He's talking about dropping the charges against the Congresswoman to avoid a riot. You can't let him. Nolan mumbled through his teeth, the pain sharp and throbbing. She assaulted me. If she walks, I'm finished. I'm the laughingstock of the department. You're a liability, Derek, Kane snapped. I've got reporters digging into the old files. Someone tipped them off. If they find out about the Ruiz money, we both go down for federal racketeering. Nolan felt a cold sweat break out. Who tipped them? The Congresswoman. She's not just sitting back. She's hunting. You need to end this. You need to discredit her now before she finds the ledger. The ledger? Nolan froze. The one you kept, Kane said. Don't lie to me. I know you kept a record of the payouts. Get rid of it, and make sure the Congresswoman takes a fall so hard she can't get up. The line went dead. Nolan threw the phone across the room. He was cornered. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. He knew he couldn't attack Vanessa physically again. She was too high profile now. He had to destroy her character. He had to make her look like a criminal. He needed to plant something. Not on her. She was too smart. But on someone she loved. His eyes fell on a file on his coffee table. Connor Brooks, the nephew. Nolan grabbed his keys. He wasn't on duty. He was suspended, but he still had his drop piece. An untraceable snub-nose .38 revolver with the serial numbers filed off, and a bag of seized fentanyl he kept in his garage safe for emergencies. He drove his personal truck, a battered Ford F-150, to the university campus where Connor attended classes. It was dark. He spotted Connor's car in the student lot. It was the same sedan he had stopped days earlier. Nolan parked 3 rows away, pulling his hoodie up. He watched Connor get out of the car and head toward the library. Nolan moved. He approached the sedan, looking left and right. The lot was empty. He used a slim gym tool, practiced and efficient, to pop the lock on Connor's door. It took seconds. He reached under the driver's seat and taped the bag of fentanyl to the frame. Then, he slid the .38 under the passenger seat. Perfect. He would make an anonymous call to the campus police soon. I saw a student waving a gun in a car. They would search the vehicle. They would find the drugs and the weapon. The headline would change instantly. Congresswoman's nephew arrested for gun and heroin trafficking. Vanessa would be forced to resign in disgrace to deal with the family crisis. The investigation into Nolan would die. Nolan closed the door softly and walked back to his truck, a twisted smile forming behind his wired jaw. He had won. He started his engine and drove out of the lot, feeling the rush of adrenaline returning. He was the Teflon sergeant. He always won. What Nolan didn't know was that the light pole directly above Connor's car had a new modification. Hours earlier, at Vanessa's request, Riley had contacted a friend in the university IT department. They had installed a high-definition 4K security camera pointed directly at Connor's parking spot. And sitting in the hive, watching the live feed, Vanessa, Rachel, and Riley saw everything. "Got him," Riley whispered, hitting the save button. Crystal clear 4K resolution. I can even see the brand of the tape he used. Vanessa watched the screen, her face unmoving, but her eyes burning with a righteous fire. He didn't just plant evidence. He signed his own death warrant. "Do we call the police?" Rachel asked, reaching for her phone. "No," Vanessa said. "If we call the police, they might bury it. The blue wall is still up. We need to go around the wall." "What are you going to do?" "We're going to let him make the call," Vanessa said. "Let him call the campus police. Let them come. Let them find it." "Are you crazy?" Rachel shouted. "Connor will be arrested." "No, he won't," Vanessa said calmly. "Because Connor isn't coming back to that car. I already sent him an Uber. The car is bait. And when the police arrive, I'll be there with the media and with this video." She turned to Riley. "Upload it, not to YouTube. Send it directly to the State Attorney General's private email and send a copy to the FBI field office in Chicago. Subject line: Police corruption. Officer Derek Nolan planting evidence. And the public?" Riley asked. "Oh, they get it last," Vanessa said. "I want the handcuffs on him before the internet crashes." The trap was sprung later that evening. Nolan, sitting at home, made the anonymous call to 911. He used a burner phone. University Lot C sedan. Kid was waving a gun. Looked like he was selling drugs. Then he hung up and poured himself a whiskey, wincing as he swallowed. He waited for the news to break. Later, the breaking news banner flashed on his TV screen, but it wasn't what he expected. It wasn't Congresswoman's nephew arrested. It was a live press conference from the parking lot. Vanessa Brooks was standing next to the Attorney General, Nathan Cole, a man known for hating police corruption. Behind them, FBI agents were dusting Connor's car for prints. Nolan leaned forward, confused. "What is this?" "Tonight." The Attorney General spoke into the microphones, his face grim. "We received incontrovertible video evidence of a suspended Chicago police officer, Sergeant Derek Nolan, breaking into a citizen's vehicle and planting a firearm and narcotics." Nolan dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor. "We have the video," Cole continued. "We have the fingerprints and we have the officer's location. Suddenly, the front door of Nolan's house exploded inward. Boom. Flashbangs blinded him. Smoke filled the living room. "Federal agents, get on the ground now. Now!" Men in tactical gear with FBI on their chests swarmed the room. Nolan, blind and deafened, raised his hands instinctively, but he was tackled hard. His face was pressed into the shattered glass of his whiskey tumbler. "Derek Nolan, you're under arrest for federal civil rights violations, possession of a firearm in furtherance of a crime, and obstruction of justice," an agent shouted as they dragged him out of his house. His neighbors were watching. The cameras were there. But the hardest blow came as they shoved him into the back of the federal SUV. He looked up and saw a black car parked across the street. Vanessa Brooks sat there. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just looked at him with that same calm, terrifying gaze she had in the courtroom. She tapped her cheek, the one he had slapped, and then pointed at him. "You started this." The gesture said, "I finished it." The heavy door slammed shut. But for Nolan, the nightmare wasn't ending. It was just starting. Because the FBI didn't just want him for planning drugs. They had seen the email about the old case. They had the ledger he had failed to destroy. And they were about to ask him about Victor Kane. The Teflon was gone. Now, he was just a man in a cage, and the wolves he had run with for years were hungry. The interrogation room at the FBI Chicago field office was colder than federal prison. Derek Nolan sat handcuffed to a steel table. He had been there for hours. He hadn't slept. The adrenaline of the arrest had faded, leaving behind a crushing, nauseating reality. Across from him sat Special Agent Carlos Mendoza. Mendoza was calm, methodical, and holding a photocopy of the ledger Nolan had hidden in his garage, the ledger he was supposed to destroy. "You have a choice, Derek," Mendoza said, sliding a photo across the table. It was a picture of Nolan's wife and children leaving their house with suitcases. "Brooke filed for divorce this morning. She's seeking full custody. She doesn't want her kids raised by a felon." Nolan stared at the photo, his eyes burning. The life he had built, the house, the pension, the respect, was gone. Evaporated because he couldn't control his temper in a courtroom. "You're looking at years behind bars for the drugs and the gun," Mendoza continued. "Plus, more for the civil rights violations. You'll be an old man when you get out, if you survive inside. Ex-cops don't do well in general population." Nolan didn't speak. He just shivered. But Mendoza leaned in. "We don't really want you. You're a small fish. You're a thug with a badge. We want the architect. We want the man who signed off on the old raid. We want Kane." Nolan looked up. The loyalty he felt to the blue wall was strong, conditioned into him over years. But Kane had told him to destroy the ledger. Kane had called him a liability. Kane was currently sitting in his office, probably planning how to pin the whole thing on Nolan to save himself. "If I talk," Nolan croaked, his wired jaw aching. "What do I get?" "Witness protection for your family," Mendoza said, "and we knock your sentence down significantly. Minimum security." Nolan closed his eyes. He thought about the slap. The moment his hand connected with Vanessa Brooks' face, he wished he could go back and cut his own hand off. "Kane has a safe deposit box," Nolan whispered. "Bank of America downtown, box 404. He keeps the recordings there. Recordings every payoff, every bribe. He records them. Insurance, just in case the politicians turn on him." Mendoza smiled. It was the smile of a hunter who had just trapped the bear. "Get the warrant," he said to the mirror. While Nolan was singing, Vanessa Brooks was back in court. But this time, she wasn't the defendant. She was the witness. The charges against her had been dropped with prejudice. The district attorney, terrified of the FBI investigation, had practically sprinted to the microphone to announce Vanessa's total exoneration. But Vanessa wasn't done. She had filed a civil suit against the city and the police department for damages, not for the money. She pledged to donate every cent to legal defense funds for wrongful arrests, but for the discovery process. She wanted everything on the record. Ms. Brooks, her lawyer, Rachel Hayes, asked in the packed courtroom, "Can you describe the impact of Officer Nolan's actions?" "It wasn't just physical pain," Vanessa said, looking directly at the jury. "It was the message when he struck me. He was telling every person in this city that the law does not apply to him, that his badge is a crown. And if he could do that to an elected official in open court, imagine what he was doing to our children in the dark." The jury was captivated, but the real drama was unfolding miles away at the police union headquarters. Victor Kane was packing a bag. He had heard about Nolan flipping. He had a flight booked to a non-extradition country. He was grabbing his passport when the door was kicked in. It wasn't the FBI this time. It was the Internal Affairs Bureau, led by the new chief of police, Raymond Soto, who had been appointed that morning after the previous chief resigned in disgrace. "Victor Kane," Chief Soto said, his gun drawn. "It's over." Kane sneered. "You can't touch me. I run this city." "Not anymore," Soto said. "We opened Box 404 an hour ago. We have the tapes, Victor. We have you on audio ordering the hit on the witness in the old case. That's murder one." The color drained from Kane's face. The arrogance that had shielded him for decades crumbled into dust. As they handcuffed him, the news helicopters were circling overhead, broadcasting the image of the untouchable union boss being led away in irons. The karma had arrived, and it hit with the force of a freight train. The lead-up to the trial of the Chicago corruption ring felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a slow-motion demolition of an empire. The federal courthouse was a fortress. Concrete barriers blocked the surrounding streets, and snipers were positioned on the adjacent rooftops. The fear of retaliation or a desperate attempt to silence witnesses was palpable. This wasn't just a trial about a slap. It was a referendum on power. Inside courtroom 21, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The gallery was packed to capacity, a mosaic of the city itself. There were activists in I Stand with Vanessa t-shirts, families of men and women who had been wrongfully imprisoned by the corrupt unit, and nervous police officers watching the end of an era. Vanessa Brooks sat in the front row, her posture impeccable. She wore a suit of stark white, a deliberate visual choice, a symbol of cleansing. Beside her sat Connor, who had grown quieter, more serious since the incident. The boy who had been trembling in the traffic stop was gone. In his place was a young man who understood the cost of freedom. The defendants were led in. Victor Kane, the former police union president, looked like a deflated balloon. Without his expensive suits and the aura of untouchability, he was just an old, angry man in an orange jumpsuit. He glared at the press box, his jaw set in a permanent scowl. Derek Nolan was unrecognizable. The Teflon sergeant, the man who had towered over the courtroom earlier, was a husk. He had lost weight. His eyes darted nervously around the room, avoiding contact with everyone, especially the other officers in the back, the ones who viewed him not as a victim, but as a rat. The prosecution, led by U.S. Attorney Sophia Bennett, was surgical. She didn't rely on theatrics. She relied on the sheer, overwhelming weight of the evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Bennett began, her voice echoing in the silent room. "You have heard the tapes. You have seen the ledger. But do not let the complexity of the racketeering charges distract you from the simple truth at the heart of this case. This is a story about men who believed they were gods. And like all false gods, they demanded sacrifice. The star witness was Nolan himself. When he took the stand, a collective murmur rippled through the gallery. Nolan looked small in the witness chair. He kept touching his jaw, a phantom pain from the strike that had started it all. "Mr. Nolan," Bennett asked, "why did you plant the drugs in Connor Brooks' car?" Nolan swallowed hard. "Because I was told to." "By whom?" "By Victor Kane." "And why did you agree?" Nolan looked up, his eyes watery. "Because we had a deal. He protected me. I did the dirty work. That's how it worked. That's how it always worked. If I didn't do it, he said he'd release the file on the Ruiz money. The money you stole from a crime scene years earlier?" "Yes," Nolan whispered. "The money we split." Kane's defense attorney, a high-priced shark named Jordan Blake, tried to tear Nolan apart on cross-examination. He painted Nolan as a liar, a desperate criminal trying to save his own skin. But the damage was done. Nolan wasn't just confessing. He was dissecting the anatomy of the corruption. He named names. He detailed the tax they levied on drug dealers, the protection fees they extorted from business owners, and the overtime fraud that had cost the taxpayers millions. But the most damning moment came when the audio tapes from Box 404 were played. The courtroom fell deathly silent as Kane's voice, clear and arrogant, filled the air. The recording was from days after the slap. "She's a problem, Derek. She's not just a politician. She's a crusader. You need to break her. Use the kid. Plant the fentanyl. If the nephew goes down for trafficking, the aunt resigns in disgrace. It's clean. It's easy. Just make sure the Congresswoman takes a fall so hard she can't get up." As the tape ended, Vanessa didn't look at the clock. She looked at the jury. She saw their faces harden. She saw the disgust. She knew in that moment that the war was won. The deliberations lasted a short time for a trial of this magnitude. It was a statement. The jury didn't need to debate. The guilt was absolute. "We find the defendant, Victor Kane, guilty on all counts," the foreman read. "Racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, wire fraud." Kane didn't react. He simply closed his eyes as the judge delivered the sentence. Life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Then came Nolan. "We find the defendant, Derek Nolan, guilty." Because of his cooperation, the judge was lenient, but only slightly. "Mr. Nolan," Judge Franklin Hayes said, peering over his glasses, "you were a sworn officer of the law. You betrayed that oath in the most vile manner possible. You attempted to frame an innocent student to cover your own incompetence. I sentence you to years in federal prison." As the gavel banged, a sound that echoed the slap that had started it all, Nolan put his head in his hands and wept. It wasn't a dignified cry. It was the sobbing of a man who realized he had thrown his entire life away for a moment of ego. Outside the courthouse, the scene was chaotic jubilation. The crowd had swelled to thousands. When Vanessa emerged, the roar was deafening. It wasn't just applause. It was a release of pent-up frustration from a city tired of corruption. Reporters swarmed her, thrusting microphones into her face. "Ms. Brooks, how do you feel? Do you forgive him? What's next?" Vanessa raised a hand and the crowd quieted. She stepped up to the podium that had been hastily set up on the steps. The wind whipped her white coat around her, making her look like a beacon against the gray stone of the courthouse. "Justice," Vanessa said, her voice steady and amplified across the plaza. is not a destination. It is a practice. Today the system worked, but only because we forced it to, only because we refused to look away. She paused, looking at Connor, then back at the cameras. Derek Nolan thought he could slap me into submission because he saw me as weak. He saw my gender, my race, and he assumed I would crumble. But he made a fatal error. He forgot that the most dangerous thing you can do to a person is to try and take their dignity. I didn't fight back for myself. I fought back for every person who was ever slapped, handcuffed, or silenced by someone hiding behind a badge. "Will you run for Senate?" a reporter shouted. Vanessa smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "We have a lot of work to do here in Chicago first," she said, "but never say never." That evening, the celebration moved to a community center in her district. It was a homecoming. There was food, music, and laughter, the sounds of a community healing. In a quiet corner, away from the festivities, Vanessa sat with Rachel, Hayes, and Riley. They were exhausted. The adrenaline that had sustained them for months was finally fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. "So," Riley said, toasting with a bottle of sparkling water, "we took down a crime syndicate. We exposed a long-standing conspiracy. We sent the union boss to prison for life. Not bad." "Details," Rachel laughed. "The point is, we won. But I have to ask, Vanessa, that day in the courtroom when he slapped you, did you know?" "What?" "Did you know you were going to knock him out?" Vanessa looked down at her hands. They were manicured, soft-looking, but underneath lay the muscle memory of a fighter. "I didn't plan it," she admitted softly. "But when his hand hit my face, everything slowed down. I didn't see a cop anymore. I saw a bully. And I remembered something my instructor told me in training years ago. He said, 'The only way to stop a bully is to speak a language they understand.' Nolan didn't understand laws. He didn't understand respect. He understood force. So I gave him a translation." Rachel shook her head in amazement. "You're a legend, Vanessa. You know they're already selling T-shirts with your face on them?" "I know," Vanessa sighed. "I hope they get my good side." Late that night, Vanessa returned home. The house was quiet. She poured herself a cup of tea and walked to the window. Outside, the city of Chicago twinkled in the darkness. It was a beautiful, complicated, messy city. Somewhere in a federal holding cell, Derek Nolan was staring at a concrete ceiling, wondering where it all went wrong. Somewhere in a maximum security transport van, Victor Kane was realizing he would never see this skyline again. And down the street, Connor was asleep in his own bed, safe, his future reclaimed. Vanessa touched her cheek. The physical pain was long gone, but the memory remained. It was a reminder. She picked up her phone. There was a new email from the governor's office. The subject line read, "Vacancy, U.S. Senate seat, request for meeting." Vanessa stared at it for a long moment. She thought about the fight. She thought about the victory. She thought about the work left to do. She typed a simple reply. "I'm listening." She hit send, turned off the light, and stood in the darkness watching the dawn begin to break over Lake Michigan. The sun was rising, burning off the fog, illuminating the streets below. It was a new day. The Teflon was gone. The glass house had shattered. And for the first time in a long time, the city felt a little bit lighter. Karma had done its job. Now it was time for Vanessa Brooks to do hers. The slap heard round the world had stopped echoing, but the impact would last forever. And that is the incredible true story of how one moment of arrogance destroyed a corruption empire. Derek Nolan thought he was slapping a helpless woman. He didn't realize he was slapping a stick of dynamite. This story reminds us that while authority can be abused, it is not invincible. It took courage, intelligence, and a little bit of martial arts to bring down the blue wall. But Vanessa Brooks proved that the truth hits harder than any fist. Justice was served, not just for Vanessa, but for every person Nolan and Kane had victimized over the years. Karma didn't just knock, it kicked the door down. Never underestimate the quiet strength that lives inside ordinary people. In that charged Chicago courtroom, one powerful slap from a man who believed his badge made him untouchable changed everything. Not because it broke Vanessa Brooks, but because it awakened the fighter she had always been. What followed was far more than personal justice. It was a powerful reminder that true courage isn't loud or flashy. It's the steady refusal to let anyone steal your dignity, no matter how intimidating the opponent seems. Vanessa could have backed down. She could have let fear silence her the way it silences so many others every single day. Instead, she stood her ground, trusted the truth, and used her mind, her skills, and her heart to expose a rotten system that had hurt countless innocent lives. Her story teaches us that one moment of fearless honesty can crack open decades of corruption. It shows that bullies only win when we stay silent, and that real power doesn't come from titles or uniforms. It comes from character, preparation, and the unbreakable decision to protect what's right. Life will test you. Someone will try to diminish you because of your gender, your background, or simply because they think they can. When that moment arrives, remember Vanessa. Breathe, stay calm, and respond with intelligence and dignity. The world needs more people who refuse to be broken, who turn pain into purpose, and who prove that justice, though sometimes slow, is still possible when good people refuse to look away. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own quiet battles or inspired you to stand taller, drop a comment below and tell me, what's one time you chose courage over fear? Which part touched you the most? And if you want more powerful true stories about ordinary heroes who changed the game, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe so you never miss the next inspiring tale. Turn on notifications. We're in this fight for justice and hope together. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.